But first, let's talk about Labor's religious discrimination bill. The Prime Minister announced today that he would not introduce the contentious bill without bipartisan support. That's right, after stubbornly refusing to engage with Peter Dutton over The Voice, Anthony Albanese is now a sudden convert to bipartisanship. A spokesperson for the Prime Minister said, and I quote, "If there's not agreement on religious discrimination, then now is not the time to have a divisive debate." I'll give you a moment to pick yourself up off the floor from fits of laughter. This is the Prime Minister who once boasted he loves fighting Tories. This is the Prime Minister who spent the first 12 months of his Prime Ministership dividing the nation according to race. But now, of course, he wants no division and he wants bipartisanship. It is, of course, because Anthony Albanese knows his religious discrimination bill is an absolute dud that, if legislated, will cause a huge backlash from religious people, including those in Western Sydney, whom he relies upon for votes. Now, this bill, which was an election promise to protect religious groups from discrimination, actually does the exact opposite. And religious people have been warning of just this fact. For instance, they warn it will effectively end Christian schooling because it removes the ability of Christian schools to discriminate in favour of Christian people when employing staff. It also removes the ability of Christian schools to get rid of staff members who violate pre-agreed Christian ethics while teaching at the Christian school. And so Anthony Albanese knows there'll be a huge backlash from religious groups if this bill is presented to Parliament, including not just Christians, but from the left's favoured religious group, from Muslims. He also knows there's no way Peter Dutton would support this bill because, unlike the progressive left, Peter Dutton doesn't hate the church. And so rather than simply admit this is a rubbish bill, what Anthony Albanese is going to do is call for bipartisanship, and then when the Liberal Party don't support it, he'll blame Peter Dutton for yet another broken promise. But I'll give Anthony Albanese this, Caleb. You can't say he hasn't introduced incredible transparency into the federal parliament, because when it comes to Anthony Albanese, you can see straight through him.
Oh, mate, how long did it take you to come up with that line?
That took me all day.
That was gold. That was fantastic. Look, I don't
it's
really...
the truth.
It is true.
It's so
it is true. And look, I don't really care how he gets there. I just care that he gets there, because any kind of religious discrimination bill is a dud. This one was a dud. The one that the Coalition put up when they were in power was a dud. When you talk about, and I know I've said this before, but when you talk about legislating rights and legislating freedoms, you necessarily talk about someone else's rights and impinging upon someone else's rights at the same time. And this, just as was evident in the Coalition's bill, makes it very obvious, because you're talking about religious freedom, you're talking about the ability for you to freely practice your religion as you want, but it talks about other people's rights. In this case, in most cases, it would be LGBTIQ, whether or not a school or a church or whatever could hire or fire or expel or enrol a transgender kid or a gay kid or whatever it might be, right? So you're saying, over here we want you to have this set of rights, but you can't impinge upon this person's set of rights. And you over there can have that set of rights, but you can't impinge on this person's set of rights over here. Once you start putting that in law, you go down a very dangerous road, because you start saying this person's rights are more important than that person's rights. The law does not need to interfere in that situation. All you need is to say that you can freely practice your religion in whatever way you like. If you are a transgender person or a gay person, you are more than free to live your life however the hell you want, and we all believe in that, but you just don't go into the spaces where you are not welcome, just as a religious person probably wouldn't go into a gay club, right? But we don't need a law to tell us whether you can and cannot do that. The law doesn't need to come into it.
This is exactly why I got a master's degree in human rights. Firstly, to just profoundly confuse the left. She's one of ours. No, she's not. But also because I knew back then even this would be the battlefront of the future. Because rights are a lovely concept, but as soon as it is my rights versus yours, then what? But notice it is always the same group that is impinging upon the same group. We've been talking about this for the better part of a decade now. Oh, this baker won't bake a gay couple a cake for their wedding. I'm sorry, since when is it your right to demand I make you a cake, even if I am a baker? If that goes against my deeply held religion, if I believe that my God says no and I believe that I answer to said God, you have Buckley's chance of making me bake your cake, period. But the fact that this is even a bill before our parliament, they think that they can sit around debating our religious freedoms, our religious rights. How far have we come that this isn't just completely laughed? The very concept isn't completely laughed off the stage. Now we need government to step in to say, oh no, the Jews, the Christians, the Catholics, the Muslims, they can practice their religions as they see fit. Thank you so much for your permission, government. But of course, that's never what this bill was it? It was actually going to be impinging on our freedom, the freedom of millions of people in our country. For what? For what? To make a much smaller minority happy while you call all the rest of it bigots and haters simply for abiding by our holy text.
Well, that's the great irony of this entire fiasco, is that a religious discrimination bill was promised originally by Malcolm Turnbull as a sop to Christians for, the same-sex marriage legislation. Don't worry, we'll protect the rights of Christians to still promote a biblical view of marriage and sexuality, to still practice your religion freely. And of course, what it's become is, as you've pointed out, it's become all about LGBTQ rights, further impinging upon the rights of Christians and Muslims and Jews to freely practice the freedom of association, freedom of belief and freedom of speech.
But there was never a need to legislate any of that stuff in the first place, because nothing is illegal until you make it illegal, right? Those freedoms are already existent and implied unless you create a law that suggests otherwise. Like, there is no need to legislate into law religious freedom. We already have religious freedom, just as there is freedom to do anything else you want to do that isn't outside the bounds of the law, because there is no law saying you can't do it.
And you make a great point saying it always comes, unfortunately, like, let's just state the obvious here, from the same side. It's no Christians or a person of Muslim faith barging into a gay club.
I know,
like,
exactly,
make me feel at home.
Because
I don't feel very welcome here. Like, for crying out loud.
Why would you want to?
No LGBTI person is going to a Muslim school being like, employ me.